The morning sun spilled golden light over Menlo Park, its warmth seeping into the clean, tree-lined streets. It was the kind of day that invited optimism, with a hint of crispness in the air promising that California's mild winter would soon give way to spring. The quiet hum of electric cars passing by mingled with the cheerful chirping of birds, creating a serene harmony. It was the kind of setting where anything could happen. Mark Zuckerberg pedaled leisurely on his sleek, custom-designed electric bike. Clad in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, he could have easily been mistaken for one of the many tech-savvy residents commuting to work. Yet, there was an unmistakable intensity in his gaze. His mind buzzed with thoughts, a storm of data points, revenue forecasts, and unpolished ideas about Meta's latest foray into educational AI. The upcoming investor meeting weighed heavily on him. "How do we make AI truly impactful for children's education?" he murmured under his breath, his words lost to the sound of his tires crunching against the smooth pavement. A deep crease formed between his brows as he mentally rehearsed the pitch he'd deliver in just under an hour. But then, his bike faltered. A sudden lurch snapped him out of his thoughts. The motor whined pitifully before falling silent, and the bike coasted to a stop. Mark looked down, bewildered. The control panel blinked erratically, and a faint hiss from the back tire confirmed his worst suspicion. A flat tire and a fried motor, all at once. Perfect. He swung his leg over and examined the damage. The thin trickle of air escaping the punctured tire was the least of his concerns. He tapped the motor casing, frowning as the display stubbornly refused to light up. A dead battery, too? Of all mornings, why today? He couldn't afford to be late for this meeting. Not when the future of Meta's latest project hinged on his ability to sell its vision. Mark pulled his phone from his pocket, intending to call for a ride, but as fate would have it, no signal bars mocked him from the corner of the screen. With a frustrated sigh, he crouched by the bike, rolling up his sleeves as if sheer willpower might coax the machine back to life. "Need a hand?" a bright, cheerful voice rang out. Mark turned his head to see a young woman standing a few feet away, a sunny smile lighting up her freckled face. She looked to be in her late 20s, wearing a navy blue cardigan and a crossbody bag that bulged with what appeared to be tools and small gadgets. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, strands escaping to frame her face. Mark hesitated, caught off guard. He wasn't used to being recognized in such casual moments. "It's just my bike. I think the motor's fried, and the tire's flat." The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with curiosity as she examined the bike. "Electric motor, huh? Looks fancy. These things can be temperamental, though. Mind if I take a look?" Mark blinked. "You know how to fix electric bikes?" The woman laughed, a warm, musical sound. "I know a little about a lot of things. Let's just say I'm good at figuring things out. I'm Lucci, by the way." "Mark," he replied automatically, watching as she crouched beside the bike and pulled a small toolkit from her bag. Her movements were swift and confident, as though she'd been born to solve problems. Lucci began tinkering with the motor, her fingers deftly twisting wires and adjusting components. "You're lucky I'm running late this morning," she said conversationally. "Normally, I'd be halfway to school by now." "School?" Mark asked, intrigued despite himself. "Preschool teacher," she said with a grin. "My kids call me Miss Fix-It because I'm always patching up broken toys or building little gadgets for the classroom. Keeps things interesting." Mark chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Sounds like you enjoy it." "Love it," Lucci said without hesitation. "Kids are like little sponges, soaking up everything around them. I try to give them the tools to explore and create." Speaking of tools, she rummaged in her bag and pulled out a hairpin. "This should do the trick." Mark raised an eyebrow as she used the hairpin to bridge a connection in the motor's wiring. "You're full of surprises." Lucci winked. Wait till you see what I can do with duct tape. Within minutes, she had the motor humming faintly again. She then turned her attention to the tire, pulling out a small tube of glue and a patch kit. Her energy was infectious, and Mark found himself strangely captivated by her enthusiasm. "You're not exactly what I expected to run into this morning," he admitted as she worked. Lucci glanced up, her eyes sparkling. "And what were you expecting? A knight in shining armor with a tire pump?" "Something like that," he said with a smirk. "Well, sorry to disappoint. Just a preschool teacher with a knack for fixing things." She finished the repairs and stood, brushing her hands off. "That should hold for now, but you'll want to get a proper tune-up soon." Mark tested the bike, the motor purring smoothly as the tires rolled without protest. "You're amazing." "Thank you." Lucci shrugged, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Just doing my part to keep the world turning." Mark hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Lucci, do you ever think about using your skills on a bigger scale?" She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "Your creativity, your ability to think outside the box. There aren't many people who can do what you just did. Have you ever thought about applying those talents somewhere like Meta?" Lucci blinked, surprised by the sudden turn in the conversation. "Meta? As in, the tech giant?" Mark nodded. "We're working on some exciting projects, especially in the realm of education and AI. I think someone like you could make a real impact." For the first time, Lucci seemed at a loss for words. The idea hung in the air between them, full of promise and uncertainty. "Well," she said finally, "that's definitely not how I thought my morning would go." Mark smiled. "Maybe mornings like this are where the best ideas start." As Lucci walked away, waving goodbye, Mark watched her go, his mind buzzing with possibilities. For the first time that day, he felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe the answers he'd been searching for were closer than he'd thought. And for Lucci, the day had just begun, though she had no idea how profoundly it would change her life. The motor hummed weakly, a feeble echo of its former power, but the electric bike still refused to move. Mark stood there, his brow furrowed in frustration. His usually sharp, problem-solving mind seemed to falter under the mounting stress of the moment. The quiet hum of Menlo Park streets offered no solution, until Lucci decided it would. "Looks like someone's having a rough morning," she quipped, the humor in her voice cutting through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. Mark glanced up sharply. There she was, Lucci, radiant with the kind of energy that seemed almost unfair at this early hour. Her freckled face carried a mixture of concern and amusement, her hazel eyes sparkling like she'd just stumbled upon a delightful puzzle. In her hands, she twirled a screwdriver absent-mindedly, as if ready to fix anything the world threw her way. "It's just this thing," Mark muttered, gesturing at the stubborn bike. "I think it's beyond saving at this point." "Beyond saving?" Lucci crouched down without hesitation, her cardigan brushing the pavement. "Let me be the judge of that." For a brief moment, Mark hesitated. Who was this woman? She had an air of spontaneity and confidence that seemed out of place in his carefully calculated world. But something about her, perhaps the way she moved with purpose, or the genuine curiosity in her gaze, made him step aside. Lucci leaned in close to the bike, her nose scrunching slightly as she studied the motor. "Ah, I see the problem," she said, pointing at a small cluster of wires. "Loose connection here. And that flat tire? Probably a nail or something. Easy fixes." Mark arched an eyebrow. "Easy? I couldn't even figure out where to start." She laughed, a light, musical sound that echoed warmly through the quiet street. "Guess you're not part of the Fix-It Club. Don't worry, I've got this." With a flourish, Lucci opened her crossbody bag, revealing an assortment of tools, random objects, and, inexplicably, a glitter-covered ruler. Mark couldn't help but chuckle. Do you always carry a repair shop in your bag? Occupational hazard, she replied with a grin, pulling out a roll of duct tape. When you're a preschool teacher, you learn to improvise. Kids break things faster than you can blink, and glue and tape become your best friends. Mark watched, intrigued, as she deftly began her work. Her movements were quick and precise, each twist of the screwdriver and flick of her wrist exuding confidence. She seemed completely at ease, as though she'd done this 100 times before. So, a preschool teacher who can fix electric bikes? Mark asked, leaning against a nearby tree. Not exactly a common combination. Lucci shrugged, not looking up. I like tinkering. Always have. Grew up taking apart radios and putting them back together. It's kind of my thing. And, you know, teaching kids how to problem solve, that's just an extension of that. Mark tilted his head, genuinely impressed. I wouldn't have guessed. Most people don't, Lucci said, glancing at him briefly. But then again, most people wouldn't expect someone like you to be standing on the side of the road, helpless with a busted bike. The comment caught Mark off guard, and he let out a laugh. Fair point. As Lucci continued working, Mark couldn't help but observe her more closely. There was a natural charm to her, a kind of fearless energy that made the impossible seem possible. She wasn't just fixing his bike, she was solving a problem, with the kind of ingenuity and optimism that felt almost contagious. Done, she exclaimed suddenly, standing up and brushing her hands off. Motor's good to go, and the tires patched. Not perfect, but it'll hold until you can get a proper repair. Mark stared at the bike, then back at Lucci. That's incredible. How did you? Magic, she said with a wink. Or maybe just practice. Mark smiled, shaking his head. You're something else. Lucci grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. There was a pause as they stood there, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Mark found himself reluctant to leave, despite the pressing urgency of his meeting. There was something about Lucci, her quick wit, her unshakable confidence, that made him want to keep talking. So, he said, breaking the silence, do you always stop to help strangers, or was this a one-time thing? Depends, Lucci replied, crossing her arms playfully. Do those strangers usually look as flustered as you did? Mark laughed. Fair enough. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment longer before Lucci glanced at her watch. Well, I'd better get going. My preschoolers are probably planning a mutiny as we speak. Wait, Mark said quickly, the words leaving his mouth before he could think. Can I ask you something? Lucci tilted her head, curious. Sure. Have you ever thought about working in tech? He asked. With your skills and the way you think, I feel like you could do some amazing things. The question caught her off guard. She blinked, her playful demeanor giving way to genuine surprise. Tech? Like, working at a company? Yeah, Mark said, his tone earnest. I think someone like you, creative, resourceful, could bring a lot to a place like Meta. Especially with your background in education. Lucci stared at him, her mind racing. The idea was so far outside her usual world that it almost seemed absurd. But there was something in his voice, a quiet conviction, that made her pause. Meta, she repeated slowly. As in? Meta? Mark nodded, his gaze steady. I think you have a perspective we need. If you're interested, I'd love to talk more about it. For the first time that morning, Lucci seemed at a loss for words. The suggestion hung in the air between them, full of possibility and weight. She glanced down at the bike, then back at Mark, her mind spinning. Well, she said finally, her voice softer, that's not how I thought my morning would go. Mark smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Mornings like this have a way of surprising us. Lucci chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it. I'll think about it. And with that, she slung her bag over her shoulder and started walking away, leaving Mark standing by his newly repaired bike. He watched her go, his thoughts a whirl of curiosity and admiration. For Lucci, the road ahead seemed more uncertain than ever. And for Mark, the morning had sparked something he hadn't felt in a long time: inspiration. Neither of them realized it yet, but this fateful encounter would mark the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives forever. The rhythmic hum of the electric bike filled the silence as Mark gave it a tentative push. The patched tire held firm, and the motor buzzed back to life with a satisfying steadiness. He turned to Lucci, who was busy stashing her tools back into her crossbody bag, a triumphant grin lighting up her face. "You weren't kidding," Mark said, his voice laced with genuine admiration. "You really know your stuff." "I told you," Lucci quipped, standing and brushing off her knees. "Magic hands." But seriously, it wasn't that complicated. These bikes are just big puzzles. A little creativity, a little tinkering, and voila. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "I think you're underselling yourself. Creativity like that isn't exactly common." Lucci tilted her head, studying him with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "And you would know that because..." She let the question hang, teasing yet inviting. "Because I spend my days surrounded by some of the brightest minds in tech," Mark replied, his tone measured but warm. "We're always solving problems, thinking outside the box, and pushing boundaries. But what you just did? That kind of hands-on ingenuity? It's rare." Lucci shrugged, her smile softening. "I don't know about rare. I just like figuring things out. It's the same with my kids. When something breaks in the classroom, a toy, a game, even their confidence, I can't help but jump in and fix it." Mark's curiosity deepened. "You really love teaching, don't you?" "Oh, absolutely," Lucci said, her eyes lighting up. "There's nothing like seeing a child's face when they figure something out for the first time. It's like the world opens up for them, and they realize they can do anything. I try to make learning fun, though. You'd be amazed at how much kids absorb when you turn math into a treasure hunt or science into a magic trick." Mark smiled, charmed by her enthusiasm. "And I thought I was passionate about my work." "Well, passion's contagious, right?" Lucci countered, her tone playful. "What about you? What's it like running Meta? I mean, you've got the whole world looking to you for the next big thing." Mark hesitated for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully. "It's a lot. Exciting, yes, but also overwhelming. There's this constant pressure to innovate, to deliver something meaningful. Lately, we've been focused on AI and its potential in education. I've been wrestling with how to make it truly impactful, especially for young learners." "AI in education?" Lucci's interest was piqued. "What kind of ideas are we talking about here?" "Well," Mark began, leaning slightly against the bike, "we've been exploring ways to create adaptive learning systems, tools that can adjust to a child's needs in real time. But what's missing is that emotional connection, that spark that makes learning feel magical. We haven't figured out how to bridge that gap yet." Lucci's eyes widened, and she took a step closer, her hands animated as she spoke. "You know what would be amazing? AI that doesn't just teach but interacts like a friend. Imagine a virtual buddy that helps kids learn social skills, practice empathy, and get excited about exploring new ideas." Mark stared at her, intrigued. "You've thought about this before?" "Well, yeah," Lucci admitted with a laugh. "I've always been fascinated by how technology can enhance learning. In my classroom, I use apps and games all the time. The kids love it, and it makes abstract concepts so much more relatable. But I've always felt like there's more we could do, something bigger. Something like creating AI companions for kids?" Mark asked, his interest growing by the second. "Exactly. Lucci's voice brimmed with excitement. Not just tutors but companions, AI that can grow with them, understand their unique personalities, and make learning feel like an adventure. You could even use it to help kids with special needs or those who struggle in traditional classrooms. Mark's mind raced as he processed her ideas. They were simple, yet groundbreaking, a fresh perspective that seemed to solve a piece of the puzzle he'd been grappling with for months. "That's brilliant," he said, almost to himself. "Really?" Lucci asked, her tone skeptical yet hopeful. "Because sometimes I feel like I'm just daydreaming out loud." "No," Mark said firmly. "You're onto something. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need, human-centered, creative, and deeply empathetic. Honestly, I can't believe you're not already working in tech." Lucci laughed, the sound tinged with disbelief. "Me? In tech? Come on. I'm just a preschool teacher who happens to like fixing things." "And that's exactly why you'd be perfect," Mark countered. "You see things differently. You're not bogged down by the same constraints or assumptions that the rest of us have." Lucci opened her mouth to respond but paused, unsure of what to say. The idea of working in tech, at Meta, no less, was so far outside her reality that it felt almost absurd. And yet, the way Mark spoke, with such conviction and sincerity, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something there. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice softer. "I love what I do now. I can't imagine leaving my kids or the classroom. It's my whole world." "I get that," Mark said, his tone understanding. "But what if you could take what you love and scale it? Imagine creating tools that could reach millions of kids, giving them the same kind of magic you bring to your classroom every day." Lucci blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. "I never thought about it like that." "Think about it," Mark said gently. "No pressure. But I'd love to hear more of your ideas. You have something special, Lucci, and I think the world deserves to see it." For a moment, the world seemed to pause around them, the bustling morning fading into the background. Lucci felt a strange mix of excitement and fear, a pull towards something unknown yet thrilling. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice steady but cautious. Mark smiled, sensing her hesitation but also her intrigue. "That's all I ask." As Lucci began walking away, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities, Mark stood by his bike, watching her go. His mind buzzed with inspiration, his earlier worries replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Neither of them knew it yet, but this conversation would mark the beginning of a partnership that would change the landscape of education, and their lives, forever. The day had taken a turn Lucci hadn't anticipated. As she walked away from the roadside encounter with Mark, her thoughts swirled with a strange blend of disbelief, excitement, and hesitation. Who casually meets a tech billionaire while fixing a bike and gets offered a chance to change the world? She glanced back over her shoulder, half expecting the scene to have evaporated like a dream. But there he was, Mark Zuckerberg, seated on his now functioning electric bike, watching her retreat with a pensive expression. Their brief conversation replayed in her mind, the way he'd called her ideas brilliant, the sincerity in his voice when he said the world deserved to see what she could do. It was flattering. It was terrifying. "Me? In tech," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head as she resumed walking. "What would I even do there?" Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her from her thoughts. She pulled it out to see a text from her colleague, Missy. "Kids are asking for you. Better hurry before they riot." Winking face. Lucci smiled despite herself. Her kids, the little whirlwinds of energy and curiosity that made her world spin. The thought of leaving them for some ambiguous opportunity felt like stepping off solid ground into the unknown. And yet, Mark's words lingered like an unfinished melody. By the time Lucci reached her classroom, the familiar chaos had taken over. Tiny hands tugged at her cardigan, excited voices competed for her attention, and a stack of wooden blocks toppled to the floor with a loud crash. "Miss Fix-It," one of the kids called out. "The robot won't move." Lucci knelt by the toy robot, its tiny wheels stuck at an awkward angle. She smiled as she began tweaking the gears, listening to the children chatter around her. The mundane act of fixing the robot grounded her, but her mind wandered back to her earlier conversation with Mark. What if she could build something bigger than this, a robot that didn't just roll around but taught children how to code, solve problems, and dream? What if her ideas about AI companions could become more than fleeting daydreams? "Miss Fix-It," another voice interrupted her thoughts, this one deeper and unfamiliar. She looked up, startled, to see Mark standing in the doorway of her classroom. Dressed in the same casual hoodie and jeans, he somehow looked both out of place and completely at ease. The children stopped what they were doing, their wide-eyed gazes flicking between him and their teacher. "Mark?" Lucci said, her voice a mix of surprise and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk to you," he said, stepping inside with a slight smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are, but they'll live," she replied, rising to her feet and brushing her hands on her skirt. "How did you even find me?" "You mentioned preschool, and your badge gave me the name of the school," he said with a shrug, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I had to follow up." Lucci folded her arms, a skeptical eyebrow arching. "This couldn't wait until, I don't know, an email?" "Not really," Mark admitted, his tone earnest. "This morning, you said some things that really stuck with me. About AI, about education. I haven't stopped thinking about it." The room was unusually quiet as the children stared at the stranger in awe. Finally, one brave little boy piped up, "Miss Fix-It, who's that?" Lucci glanced at Mark, then back at her class with a smirk. "That's Mark. He's here because, well, I guess he likes to talk about robots." The kids erupted into giggles, and Mark chuckled, raising his hands in surrender. "Guilty as charged." Lucci led him to the hallway, away from the curious stares and whispering. "Okay, you've got my attention," she said, crossing her arms again. "What's so important you had to show up in person?" Mark took a deep breath, his expression serious. "I wasn't kidding when I said your ideas are brilliant. You see things from a perspective we don't, one that's grounded, creative, and deeply connected to how kids learn. That's rare, Lucci. And I think you could help us create something truly revolutionary." Lucci felt her heart race, a mix of exhilaration and dread tightening in her chest. "Mark, I'm just a preschool teacher. I'm not a programmer or an engineer. I don't even know where to start in a place like Meta." "That's the beauty of it," Mark said, his voice calm yet compelling. "We have the engineers, the programmers, the data scientists. What we don't have is someone like you, someone who understands what kids need, how they think, and how to make learning feel like magic." Lucci opened her mouth to argue but stopped. His words struck a chord she couldn't ignore, echoing her own private hopes and frustrations. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice quieter. "I love what I do here. These kids mean everything to me. I can't imagine walking away from that." Mark nodded, his gaze steady. "I get that. And I'm not asking you to leave that behind. I'm asking you to think about how you could expand it, how you could take what you do here and bring it to millions of kids around the world." The enormity of his words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Lucci felt a lump rise in her throat, her emotions tangled in a chaotic mess of doubt, excitement, and fear. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," she admitted. "It's a lot." Mark smiled, his expression kind. "No one's ever really ready for the big moments. But that's when we grow the most, when we step outside our comfort zones and take a chance." Lucci's eyes searched his, looking for a sign that this wasn't just some grandiose pitch but something real, something worth risking everything for. And in his steady, unwavering gaze, she saw the sincerity that had drawn her into this conversation in the first place. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice firmer now. "But no promises." "That's all I'm asking," Mark said, his smile widening. "Take your time. And if you have more ideas, I'd love to hear them." With that, he left, his footsteps echoing softly down the hallway. Lucci stood there for a moment, her thoughts a storm of emotions and possibilities. The noise of her classroom reached her ears again, grounding her in the life she'd built. But now, it felt as though a new door had been opened, a door she wasn't sure she had the courage to step through. As she returned to her students, their joyful chaos enveloping her once more, Lucci couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was beginning. Whether she was ready or not, her world had just gotten a lot bigger. The faint hum of fluorescent lights in the quiet staff lounge seemed louder than usual as Lucci sat at the corner table, staring blankly at her untouched cup of coffee. The room, usually a haven of laughter and camaraderie during break times, felt stifling now. Her colleagues bustled about, discussing lesson plans and weekend errands, their chatter fading into white noise as her thoughts spiraled. The morning's events replayed in her mind like a looping video. Mark's unexpected arrival at her classroom. His earnest pitch, delivered with the kind of conviction that made even the most outlandish dreams feel possible. And then his parting words, "No one's ever really ready for the big moments. But that's when we grow the most." Lucci ran a hand through her hair, letting out a long sigh. Was this one of those big moments? Or was it just an unrealistic fantasy, too good to be true? "Earth to Lucci," came a teasing voice. She blinked, snapping out of her trance to see Missy, her closest colleague and friend, leaning against the counter with a knowing smirk. Missy's red curls bounced as she tilted her head, her arms crossed in mock impatience. "You've been staring at that coffee like it insulted you," Missy said, taking a sip from her own mug. "What's up?" Lucci hesitated, then sighed again. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Missy raised an eyebrow, pulling out a chair to sit across from her. "Try me." For the next few minutes, Lucci recounted her encounter with Mark Zuckerberg, from the broken bike to his unexpected offer. Missy listened in wide-eyed silence, her expression shifting between disbelief, amazement, and concern. When Lucci finally finished, Missy leaned back in her chair, letting out a low whistle. "Wow. That's not what I expected when I asked what's up." "No kidding," Lucci muttered, running her fingers along the edge of her coffee cup. "I don't know what to do, Missy. It's not like I was looking for a career change. I love what I do here." Missy nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "But it's not every day you get a chance like this. I mean, come on, Lucci. Mark Zuckerberg shows up at your preschool and asks for your help. That's straight out of a movie." Lucci groaned, burying her face in her hands. "That's the problem. It doesn't feel real. And even if it is, what if I'm not good enough? What if I leave this place, take the risk, and fail?" Missy reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Lucci's arm. "You're already doing amazing things here. You've built robots out of cardboard, turned math lessons into treasure hunts, and somehow managed to teach 3-year-olds about ecosystems. If anyone can handle this, it's you." "Maybe," Lucci said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But leaving the kids? I don't know if I can do that. They're my whole world." Missy squeezed her arm gently. "You're not leaving them behind. If anything, you'd be opening doors for more kids, ones who might never have the chance to experience the kind of magic you bring to your classroom." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Lucci knew Missy was right, but the thought of stepping into the unknown still made her stomach churn. That evening, Lucci sat on her small apartment balcony, a notebook and pen resting on her lap. The city lights twinkled below, and the distant hum of traffic filled the air. Normally, this was her favorite time of day, a chance to reflect, to plan, to dream. But tonight, her thoughts felt like a tangled ball of yarn, impossible to unravel. She opened the notebook and began to write, hoping the act of putting pen to paper would bring clarity. Pros. Chance to impact millions of kids. Opportunity to grow and learn new skills. Work on something groundbreaking. Cons. Leaving my current job and the kids I love. Stepping into an unknown world. Risk of failure. She stared at the list, her heart heavy. The pros seemed exciting, even inspiring, but the cons felt personal, deeply tied to who she was. How could she give up the daily joy of seeing her students' faces light up with discovery? How could she walk away from the tiny hands that tugged at her sleeves, the laughter that filled her classroom? A sudden buzz interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at her phone to see a new email notification. Subject: A Vision for the Future, from Mark Zuckerberg. Lucci hesitated, then opened the email. It was brief but heartfelt. Lucci. Thank you for giving me the chance to share my thoughts today. I understand this is a big decision, and I don't want to rush you. But I believe in your potential, and I believe we can create something extraordinary together. Attached is a presentation outlining some of our initial ideas for AI in education. I'd love to hear your thoughts when you're ready. Take care. Mark. She clicked the attachment, curiosity overcoming her hesitation. The presentation was sleek, filled with colorful graphics and bold statements about revolutionizing education. But what caught her attention most were the handwritten notes scattered throughout the slides, Mark's personal thoughts, questions, and even references to their conversation earlier that day. One slide featured a concept sketch of an AI companion, a cheerful, cartoon-like character designed to engage children in interactive learning. Next to it, Mark had scribbled, Lucci mentioned emotional connection, how do we incorporate that here? Her breath caught. He hadn't just listened, he'd internalized her ideas, weaving them into his vision. By the time Lucci closed her laptop, the city lights had blurred into streaks of color against the dark sky. Her chest ached with the weight of the decision before her. Staying meant clinging to the comfort of what she knew, the safety of her world. But leaving meant taking a leap of faith into a future she could barely imagine. She gazed out at the horizon, her thoughts like the wind, restless, relentless. Deep down, she knew there wasn't a perfect answer. There was only the question, am I brave enough to try? As the night deepened, one thing became clear, whatever choice she made, it would change everything. The morning light spilled into Lucci's apartment, painting her living room in hues of gold and soft shadows. It was quiet, the world outside just beginning to stir. Lucci sat on the edge of her couch, gripping her phone tightly. Her thumb hovered over the call button, the screen displaying Mark Zuckerberg's name. Her heart thudded in her chest, a rhythmic drumbeat of doubt and anticipation. It wasn't just the decision itself that overwhelmed her, it was what the decision represented, a leap into a world she barely understood, where the stakes were higher than she had ever known. She let out a shaky breath and set the phone down, burying her face in her hands. What am I doing? She thought. She'd spent the entire night tossing and turning, her thoughts caught in an endless loop. Every time she convinced herself to stay in her comfort zone, an image of her students' bright, curious faces would flash in her mind, followed by Mark's words, imagine creating tools that could reach millions of kids. Lucci's gaze fell on the notebook sitting open on her coffee table. Her pros and cons list stared back at her, each point etched into her mind. The cons still felt heavy, leaving the classroom, stepping into the unknown, but the pros glimmered with possibility, like a distant star she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. A text from Missy appeared. Whatever you decide, you're going to be amazing. Just trust yourself. Red heart. Lucci smiled faintly, her heart lifting ever so slightly. She picked up the phone again, her thumb hovering once more. This time, she didn't hesitate. She pressed call. Lucci. Mark's voice on the other end was warm, filled with unmistakable energy. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. How are you? Hi, Mark, she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I've been thinking a lot about your offer. And, he prompted, the anticipation in his tone palpable. Lucci took a deep breath. I'm in. For a moment, there was silence, and she worried she'd imagined his enthusiasm. Then came his response, that's fantastic. Lucci, you have no idea how excited I am to have you on board. This is going to be amazing. His excitement was infectious, and for the first time since their conversation began, Lucci felt a spark of confidence. I still don't know what I'm doing, she admitted, but I'm willing to learn. I want to make sure this actually helps kids, you know? That it's not just another piece of tech for tech's sake. Mark's voice softened, a note of understanding in his tone. That's exactly why we need you. Your perspective is going to keep this project grounded and meaningful. Trust me, Lucci, you're going to make a bigger difference than you realize. Her chest tightened with a mixture of fear and hope, but she nodded to herself. Okay. What's next? Next. Mark said, his tone light with excitement. We'll get you set up with everything you need. I'll have someone from our team reach out with the details. Welcome to Meta, Lucci. Let's change the world. The next few days were a whirlwind. Lucci submitted her resignation to the preschool, a task that left her teary-eyed and clutching a tissue in Missy's office. You're going to do incredible things, Missy had said, pulling her into a tight hug. Just don't forget about us when you're famous. Leaving the kids was the hardest part. When Lucci broke the news to her class, their little faces crumpled with confusion and sadness. She knelt down, her heart breaking as she explained in simple terms. I'm going to a new job where I can help more kids like you learn and grow, she said, her voice trembling. But I'll always remember you. One of her students, a curly-haired boy named Sammy, hugged her tightly. You'll still fix things, right? He asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Lucci laughed softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. Always, Sammy. Always. On her first day at Meta, Lucci stepped into the sleek, modern campus, her nerves jangling like wind chimes in a storm. The glass walls and open workspaces felt like another world, a stark contrast to the colorful chaos of her preschool. She clutched her bag tightly, feeling small and out of place among the tech-savvy employees bustling around her. Mark greeted her in the lobby with his characteristic hoodie and a welcoming smile. Ready to dive in? He asked, his energy as contagious as ever. As ready as I'll ever be, Lucci replied, forcing a smile despite the butterflies in her stomach. He led her to the team she'd be working with, a diverse group of engineers, designers, and educators. They welcomed her warmly, their enthusiasm easing her nerves. Over the course of the day, they dove into brainstorming sessions, workshops, and discussions about the AI companion project. Lucci found herself surprised by how much she had to offer. Her ideas about emotional connection and creative learning sparked lively debates and new directions for the project. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but exhilarated, her mind buzzing with possibilities. That evening, as Lucci settled into her apartment, she opened her laptop and began drafting ideas for the AI companion. The notebook from her coffee table now sat beside her, filled with fresh sketches and notes. She imagined Sammy and her other students interacting with the AI, their laughter and curiosity guiding her every decision. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mark. You did amazing today. Keep going. This is just the beginning, smiley face. Lucci smiled, her earlier doubts fading like the sunset outside her window. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of calm, a quiet certainty that she'd made the right choice. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was full of challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. With a deep breath, she closed her laptop, her mind already racing with new ideas. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more problems to solve, but Lucci felt a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time, the thrill of possibility. Her leap into the unknown had only just begun, but for the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The buzz of activity on the Meta campus was almost overwhelming. Rows of sleek, glass-walled offices stretched endlessly, their interiors humming with the quiet energy of innovation. Screens glowed with data and prototypes, and clusters of people huddled together in animated discussions. Lucci felt like an outsider stepping into a world she'd only glimpsed from the periphery. Clutching her bag, she followed Mark through the sprawling atrium. His casual demeanor, hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets, a relaxed gait, seemed incongruous with the weight of his position. He turned to her, a reassuring smile on his face. "Nervous?" he asked. Terrified, Lucci admitted with a laugh that sounded more like a squeak. "That's a good sign," Mark said. "It means you care." They stopped in front of a conference room where a diverse group of engineers, designers, and strategists were seated, their voices a low hum of anticipation. Mark gestured for her to step in first. The sudden spotlight made her feel exposed, but she forced herself to smile and walk in. "Everyone," Mark began, his voice cutting through the noise, "meet Lucci. She's the reason we're about to take this project in a whole new direction." The eyes of the room turned to her, and for a moment, Lucci felt frozen. Then, a young woman with bright blue hair stood and extended a hand. "I'm Maya, lead engineer on the AI team. We've been hearing about your ideas, and honestly, we're stoked to have you." The warmth in Maya's smile melted Lucci's nerves just a little. She shook her hand, murmuring a polite, "Thank you. I'm excited to be here." Mark led her to a seat, and the meeting began. It was unlike anything Lucci had experienced, fast-paced, full of technical jargon she didn't fully understand, and brimming with creativity. Concepts like neural networks and machine learning flew across the table, punctuated by bursts of laughter and heated debate. Lucci sat quietly at first, absorbing as much as she could. But as the discussion shifted to the emotional dynamics of AI, she leaned forward, her nerves forgotten. "I think the key is to make the AI feel like a real companion," she interjected, her voice gaining strength as the words poured out. "Kids don't just need information, they need connection. The AI should be able to adapt to their moods, encourage them when they're frustrated, and celebrate their wins, even the small ones." The room fell silent, and Lucci felt a sudden wave of panic. Had she overstepped? Said something foolish? Maya broke the silence with an enthusiastic clap. "Yes. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need." The rest of the team nodded, and a few people chimed in with ideas that built on hers. Mark caught her eye and gave a small nod of approval, his expression a mixture of pride and reassurance. For the first time since she'd walked into the building, Lucci felt like she belonged. As the weeks passed, Lucci found herself diving deeper into her new role. Her mornings, once filled with the chatter of preschoolers, were now spent brainstorming with some of the brightest minds she'd ever met. She quickly learned how to navigate the jargon, asking questions when needed and offering her unique perspective on education and children's emotional needs. One afternoon, she found herself alone in a small, sunlit conference room, sketching out a concept for the AI companion. The idea had taken shape in her mind over the past few days, a digital friend that could grow with the child, adapting to their learning style and personality while maintaining an empathetic core. Her notebook was filled with doodles and notes. Celebrate small wins, e.g., you did it. Let's try something new together. Respond to frustration with encouragement, not just solutions. Incorporate games that teach empathy, collaboration, and problem-solving. She tapped her pen against the table, her thoughts interrupted by the sound of the door opening. It was Maya, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use a break, Maya said, setting one of the cups in front of Lucci. Thanks, Lucci replied, gratefully accepting the drink. Maya leaned over to glance at the sketches. These are great. The emotional aspect is something we've always struggled to nail. It's easy to program logic, it's harder to make it feel human. Lucci nodded. That's what I keep thinking about. Kids don't just need answers, they need someone who understands what they're feeling. That's what makes the difference. Maya smiled. And that's why you're here. We've got the tech. You've got the heart. Together, we're unstoppable. Despite the progress, the road wasn't without its challenges. Some days, Lucci felt out of her depth, her lack of technical expertise glaringly obvious. There were moments when her ideas clashed with the team's more data-driven approach, leading to tense discussions and self-doubt. One particularly tough day, she found herself back on the balcony of her apartment, staring at the city lights. The weight of her choice pressed down on her, and for a moment, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen to see a message from Mark. Big leaps come with big challenges. Don't let today's struggles dim tomorrow's vision. You're doing amazing work. Keep going. Lucci smiled faintly, the words reigniting the spark she'd felt when this journey began. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the doubt ebb away. By the end of her first month, the AI companion prototype was starting to take shape. Lucci's ideas had woven seamlessly into the project, guiding its development in ways she hadn't thought possible. The prototype, a cheerful digital character named Milo, was designed to engage with children through playful learning activities, empathetic responses, and a dash of humor. One afternoon, the team gathered to test Milo for the first time. The room buzzed with anticipation as Maya entered a command, bringing Milo to life on the large screen. Hello. I'm Milo, the character chirped, its animated eyes sparkling with excitement. What's your name? The team erupted into applause, but Lucci felt a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized how much this moment would mean to her, seeing her ideas come alive in a way that could touch countless lives. As the test continued, Milo interacted seamlessly with the team, responding to prompts with a warmth that felt almost human. When Milo celebrated a correct answer with an enthusiastic, "You're amazing. Let's try the next challenge together." Lucci couldn't help but grin. Mark turned to her, his expression triumphant. This is just the beginning, Lucci. You've already made a difference. She nodded, her chest swelling with pride and determination. For the first time, she truly believed it. This was her new chapter, and she was ready to write it. The glow of the large screen filled the conference room, casting a warm light on the faces of the gathered team. Milo, the cheerful AI companion, was the center of attention. Its animated features, bright eyes, a friendly smile, moved fluidly as it interacted with a small group of children brought in for a beta test. The room was silent except for the children's laughter and Milo's upbeat responses. Great job. You found the missing puzzle piece, Milo said to a young girl who had just solved a math problem on the tablet. The girl beamed with pride as Milo added, "You're a problem-solving superstar. What should we explore next?" Lucci stood at the back of the room, her heart swelling as she watched the children engage with Milo. For weeks, she had poured her energy into making sure the AI would resonate with kids, not just as a tool, but as a companion they could trust and enjoy learning with. Seeing the results now felt surreal. "Look at that," Maya whispered, nudging Lucci's arm. "They love it." Lucci nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I can't believe it's actually working," she murmured. "It's not just working," Maya said, her voice filled with pride. "It's amazing. You did this." As the children's session wrapped up, the team gathered in a nearby lounge to debrief. The mood was electric, fueled by the success of the beta test. Feedback flowed as team members excitedly shared observations and brainstormed enhancements. Mark arrived mid-discussion, his arrival punctuated by a round of applause. He smiled and waved it off as he made his way to Lucci. "I heard the test was a hit," he said, his tone casual but filled with pride. "It was," Lucci replied, her face lighting up. The kids loved Milo. They didn't just interact with it, they connected with it. Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's exactly what we were aiming for. You've brought something truly unique to this project, Lucci. We couldn't have done it without you." Lucci felt a surge of gratitude, but she quickly waved it off. "It wasn't just me. This whole team made it happen." "True," Mark said with a grin. "But you were the spark. And this is only the beginning." As the weeks turned into months, Milo's development progressed rapidly. With each iteration, Lucci's influence became more pronounced. She worked closely with the team to refine the AI's emotional responses, ensuring they felt natural and empathetic. She introduced interactive storytelling modules that encouraged creativity and role-playing games that fostered collaboration among children. The impact of her work soon extended beyond the Meta campus. During a presentation at an international education summit, Mark and Lucci unveiled Milo to a captivated audience of educators, policymakers, and tech enthusiasts. Standing on the brightly lit stage, Lucci felt a wave of nerves as she faced the crowd. Mark introduced her with a few words that filled her with pride and pressure. "This is Lucci, the heart and soul behind Milo's success. She understands what kids need better than anyone I've ever met." Lucci took a deep breath, gripping the microphone. "When we started this journey, our goal wasn't just to create an educational tool," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We wanted to create a friend, someone who could make learning feel exciting, safe, and full of possibilities. Because that's what kids deserve." She gestured to the screen behind her, where Milo appeared, animated and engaging. "Milo isn't just here to teach, Milo is here to listen, to encourage, and to inspire. And today, I'm thrilled to share that we're already seeing Milo make a difference in the lives of children around the world." The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Lucci stepped off the stage, she felt a mix of relief and exhilaration. The project she'd once doubted herself capable of contributing to was now touching countless lives. Back at Meta, the impact of Milo was becoming clear. Schools in underserved communities began adopting the AI, integrating it into their classrooms to provide personalized support for students who needed it most. Reports came in from educators who praised Milo's ability to engage students who struggled in traditional settings. One such report came from a small school in rural Nebraska, where a teacher wrote, "Milo has transformed the way my students learn. Kids who were once disengaged are now excited to solve problems and share their ideas. Milo doesn't just teach them, it makes them believe in themselves." Lucci read the email aloud to the team during a meeting, her voice trembling with emotion. The room was quiet as everyone absorbed the weight of the teacher's words. "This," Lucci said softly, "is why we do what we do." Despite the successes, challenges persisted. Some critics questioned the reliance on technology in education, raising concerns about overdependence and privacy. Others doubted whether an AI could ever truly replicate the role of a human teacher. Lucci faced these critiques head-on, often speaking at conferences and panels to advocate for a balanced approach. "Milo isn't here to replace teachers," she explained during one heated debate. "Milo is here to support them, to provide tools and insights that make their jobs easier and more effective." Her words earned her both respect and scrutiny, but she remained steadfast in her belief that the work was worth it. One evening, months after Milo's global launch, Lucci found herself back on her balcony, gazing out at the city lights. She held a letter in her hands, a handwritten note from one of her former students, Sammy. "Miss Fix-It. The robot you fixed is still my favorite. I miss you, but I'm happy you're helping more kids like me. Milo sounds really cool. I hope you're happy, too. Tears welled in Lucci's eyes as she folded the letter carefully. She was happy, happier than she'd imagined when she first left her classroom. The path she'd chosen had been uncertain, filled with challenges and doubts, but it had also been deeply fulfilling. As the night breeze whispered through the city, Lucci smiled. She had taken the leap, and in doing so, she had found not just a new chapter, but a new purpose. And this, she knew, was just the beginning.